Welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today's webinar Wednesday, hosted by Hawk Ridge Systems. My name is Scott Woods. I'm the product manager for our TechCom suite here at Hawk Ridge. And today we're going to be covering SOLIDWORKS animation options. And the two that I'm going to be covering today is Visualize. It's actually Visualize Pro for the animation. That should say Visualize Pro and Composer. And really where the strengths are in both of these softwares. Now there is a third animation option in SOLIDWORKS, that's the motion study. And just keep in mind that if you are currently using motion study, if you're interested in that, any motion studies you make in SOLIDWORKS will import into Visualize Pro, and you will be able to render those out in photorealistic quality. So if that's something you're interested in or currently do, and just need more information, go ahead and hit us up and we'll gladly take you through that. Okay, so let's get started here. So really the agenda for today and the purpose of today, not only to show Composer and Visualize, but to talk about why you would use either one for animation, and in what situations you'd use either one for animation. And it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. You know, what that end product that you want to output is going to be. And so if it's going to be, if you're looking for something a little bit more technical, something that's like procedural, if you wanted to make an animation that was a step-by-step assembly, or you know how to operate it, or you know you wanted to dive in and see all the little pieces moving around and things like that, you probably want to use Composer for that. And the reason why I say that is because most of the time those kind of animations don't necessarily have to be photorealism. You're trying to get a point across. And Composer is going to be faster to work in. It's going to be easier to work in. It's going to render out faster. And by that, I'll go into more detail what I mean by that when I actually get into the actual software. Composer is also great for doing like fly-throughs. Visualize is great for that as well. So fly-throughs, and then if you want to do like a shop layout and show where things are and conveyor belts and all that stuff and have the camera fly around, you can do that. Now, Visualize Pro, this is when we get into the photorealism. And when you're talking photorealism, you're also talking additional time, and they go together. And so if you need your output to be that photo quality, you want to output something that you really want to dazzle your audience, and it's more for like marketing or trade shows, or you know, if you want to put something on your website that's just stunning. That is what Visualize is for. So they kind of have two different distinct purposes. One is to convey information. The other, they're both conveying information, but Composer conveys more of it in a technical fashion, while Visualize conveys it more in a photorealistic fashion. And if you are making assembly instructions, you probably don't need that to be photorealism. You can save time if you do that in Composer. Okay, so what I want to make sure is that everybody knows that this is not a comparison video between the two softwares. So I'm not competing them against each other. I want to show, you know, this is when you use Composer, this is when you use Visualize. Perhaps in your situation you need both. So that also comes up quite a bit. These two videos here are on our YouTube page currently, and I know these links are quite long, so I'll have these links at the bottom of the recording once we have it posted so you can access them. But these are comparison videos to show them against their competitors, basically. So that's for the top one there is Composer, second one is Visualize, and you get a one-to-one comparison with times and all that stuff, so you can actually get more information on the product itself. Okay, so before we jump into the software, I want to talk about what we're going to show. So first off, we talked about this basically already, but in Composer for the technical output, really the benefit is that you get both what are called views and timeline. So when you're working in SOLIDWORKS Composer, you can do everything in independent views. Then you take those views, you bring them into an animation, and from there, you output your video. And that's kind of it's basically a free process when you're going from views to animation. And it's easy to create this real structured animation that way. Also, within Composer, you get 2D elements. So you get stuff like annotations, and balloons, and arrows. Composer is made to create technical documentation with that sort of element in it to really convey a purpose. And so it's perfect for technical animations. Then we get into Visualize Pro, and that's for photorealism. And so that's for the lifelike photorealism quality. Now I can do all of those things that Composer can do except for the 2D elements. So I mean, you can do full work instructions if you wanted to, but you don't have the benefit in Visualize of the views. You have strictly a timeline to work in, and if you've ever worked in the timeline, it is more difficult to work in because you have to make sure, okay, and I'll show this in the software. We gotta lock down the camera before you move it. You gotta lock down these parts before you move it, that sort of thing. For Composer, you don't have to worry about that. So that's kind of the differences between the two, and it really is because they're made for two separate purposes. And then where the strengths are in Visualize is a lot of the automatic content you get out of that. So you import your model from SOLIDWORKS or from wherever you want to import that from. Actually, the one I'm using today is a step file. I'm not even sure what program made it. And so if you bring that in, bring anything in, you can set your scenes, set your materials, and then you say, hey, I want a VR rotatable model. I want a panoramic interactive image, which I'll explain here in a minute what exactly that is. And you just tell it what you want to output, and it outputs that. So there's no additional work needed to set that up. So it's pretty nice. And yeah, so perfect for like your photorealism. That's going to be fly-throughs, images, and then if you want that nice content for your website, the interactive content, that's what that is. Okay, so enough of that. Let's jump into the software. So the first thing, let me go ahead and close that down. All right, so let's jump into Composer. And in Composer, we got a couple different examples. So what I want to show first is an animation. And like I said, I'm showing this animation over a GoToMeeting, so it's going to be a little choppy. Unless you have a killer, internet connection, which it, might be pretty smooth. But I'll go ahead and have this online so everybody can see it. But basically what this is it's a step-by-step animation made in Composer, and it's made for assembly purposes. So either this is, on the shop floor, or this is, a video that you have on your website, or you're going to send on a jump drive or CD with your product you're sending out, so your end customer can then put it together. And so the whole point of this is, eliminate those words, eliminate the paragraphs, show it visual so that there's no communication loss, and to be able to really display exactly what you want to see in real time in an animation, but make it easy and fast to produce. So with that said, what I have here is basically a shell of what that animation is. It's I've done a little bit of work here just because we don't have a whole lot of time in this webinar to put this whole thing together, but this is an unfinished file, so it ends right at this stage here. And then as you can see, the timeline here is completely blank. I haven't added anything to the timeline yet, so we'll go ahead and set that up and show how we basically get that free animation once we set up in views. And this is why I like to use Composer for step-by-step procedural content, because you can use the views to your advantage and just move those to the timeline, you get a video. So let me thumb through the views here. So if you see what I have, basically I've imported the model, I've added my colors, I've added some textures. By the way, if you're using Composer currently and you want to add a texture to like this back wall, if you see that texture, you say map path, and you just map that to a image that you want, and this is just like a stucco pattern that I have that I mapped it to. Then I isolated the bed, the race car bed. Of course, added my coloring and textures to that as well. Then I went through and I started exploding it apart. So I just used the transform tools to move things around. Isolated what I want to work on, threw on my bill of materials, and then started putting these guys together. See these 2D elements, we get the balloons and then the arrows, and that shows exactly what we're working on for this step and then that movement. This also controls the animation. So as you make views of each step of the process, you're controlling that in the animation. Here instead of controlling that in a timeline, where when you control stuff in a timeline, it takes a bit more knowledge for animation. You actually have to know what you're doing, basically, because you have to say, oh, I want to move this part, but before I move it, I want to lock it down. Okay, now I got to move this other part. Oh, I haven't moved that part yet, so I got to lock it down. I want to translate it, but I want to make sure I get that right for that section of time. Where in views, you don't have to even worry about that, because all you're doing is you're going from one step to the other. And in between these views, all that I have is I have an exploded step. Then I click on something. I'll show this here in a second. I click on something, I tell it to go home. That goes home. I add my 2D stuff like the arrow, and then I go on to the next view, the next step. So it's a very simple process, and it does create a lot of steps on the left here, but having them there doesn't really hurt the product, doesn't really add a whole lot of weight to the file or anything like that. So it's okay to have a ton of different steps on the left. We go through the whole process, which we saw in that video, till we get to this stage here. And basically from here we say, okay, I want to install this mattress, so all I have to do is click on it. I go up here to restore neutral position. That tells it to go home. I create a new step for that. Take a step back, you can see that mattress being installed, so it's controlling that animation. Now if I wanted to, I could put an arrow. So hey, we're gonna, even though it's obvious what's happening, but let's put an arrow in there to show the arrow going down. So for that, I'm going to zoom in. So I want to create a camera key so I can get back to this angle that I have. We'll zoom in, author, arrow, hit tab just so I can see. I want a vertical edge like that guy right there. Select that vertical edge, click it, get our arrow, double click the camera view to get it back. Now that arrow, it's attached to the mattress, so I can move it anywhere I want. So let me go ahead and let's select it. Oop. And let's go to transform, translate. I'm just going to move it like here, like that. And we'll update the view. Then when I go back to the previous step, we'll see the arrow appear and then move down with it. So it's going to appear with the mattress and move down with it. And it's as easy as that. Now I want to go to the next step, which is installing this bolster or this lumbar pillow. So I no longer need this camera view, so I'm going to remove it. Create a new step for the bolster. Now I don't need this arrow anymore. That was from the last step. So I'm going to select it. Now this is where there's a little trick in this video here. If I hide it, the thing with animation is you hide it, it hides it for the whole animation. So we don't want to do that here. When you're setting up views for animation, you want to make sure that we're setting the opacity down. So take the opacity, set that down. That way the animation, the opacity is controlling if something is visible or invisible and not hiding it. Because we don't want to suppress it in the assembly. We just want to make it invisible. So that's the option there for that. So for this next step, let me go and update it without the arrow. I want to install this pillow here, but there's like a compound movement here. It doesn't just, I just don't want it to go at an angle. I want to say, hey, we want to push it over and push it down so it looks better in the animation so it's not flying through components. The best way to do that is to tell it to go home and then to move it up. Actually, right now you see that my my coordinate system is not on my positive, directly on the y-axis. So if I go to align pivot with world axis, I can change that and then just take that guy and move it up like that. Update the step. Then I want one more step to then tell it to go home, and it goes into location. Then maybe I take this balloon and move it so I can actually see where it's pointing, like that. Pretty simple stuff. Now I go back and I see what I just did. And we got the installation of the mattress. Then we have the bolster moving over. Then we have the bolster moving down, annotation, or the balloon moving so we can actually see what's going on. And then I've just made an animation by these steps here. Now we go into the timeline. So I switch to timeline mode, which is that little icon right up here in the left-hand corner. If you noticed in that video I showed, before I started going through and creating the actual steps of the process, I had a little fly through. So let me go ahead and show how that's done. So if you've ever worked in an animation timeline, this might be a little bit familiar to you. If not, I'll throw in a couple tricks here just to get you started. So now I said that you get the animation for free in Composer. It's true, but I also want to show how you can work within the animation timeline to do whatever you want. And by the way, the timeline in Composer and the timeline in Visualize and the timeline in SOLIDWORKS Motion Study, they vary from each other, but they're all very similar. If you learn one, it's easy to pick up on the rest. They're a little bit different how they behave, but a timeline is a timeline. Once you understand keyframes, you kind of get it, right? So first thing I want to do is I want to say 1 second in, I want to lock down the camera. And the reason why I do this, hit this little camera key right there, that creates a camera key, is because if you've ever watched an animation, and as soon as you hit play, things start moving, it's very confusing. It's like, well, my brain didn't even get a chance to process what's going on before things start flying around. So I like to have these pauses, especially when it comes to camera movement. So you'll see anytime I make an animation, I'll move the camera, I'll pause it, I'll move it again, I'll pause it, things like that. It's easier to watch. So pause it for a second. Then let's say 3 seconds in, I want to zoom in to an area and look around for that fly through. Now, in Composer, there's two different ways to zoom the camera. One, if I just use the middle mouse wheel and zoomed in, I'm not moving the camera itself. Think about it as like you got this DSLR with a zoom lens. You are not moving. You're staying in one place and you're zooming into a bird way off in the distance, right? You're just zooming into it. So anything that becomes between you and the bird is going to get in the way of the camera. It's the same concept here. So I want to step toward the bird, not zoom into it, as an analogy. I hope everybody got that. There's no bird in this animation. Okay, so for that, I want to go to Home and this little airplane, it's fly through mode right there. So here I'm going to go and take this airplane and I'm going to left click to zoom in and right click to zoom out like that. And if you see this text right here at the bottom of the screen, it says the up down keys control the speed of the zoom. So depending on the size of your model, you want to control the speed of the zoom. So you might need to hit the arrow up or arrow down on your keyboard to slow down this zoom if it's like zooming way in too slow or too fast and it's confusing. So, all right, so let's use this guy to zoom in like that. And I want to create a camera key. And like I said, I always double up my camera key. So I'm going to go forward a little bit in time, make another one, go forward in time, and let's rotate this. Now, there's a ground in this animation, so I have something to go off of. I want to rotate from a point kind of close to where my feet would be so I can look around. So I'm going to use the middle mouse button there to click the ground and kind of just look around. Maybe take a look at this car or something like that, and then create a camera key. Go forward, create another camera key, and we'll take a look at what's going on. So it's going to walk forward, it's going to look at the car. Maybe over here, we're going to go ahead and say, I meant to click the ground. Something like that. So as you can see, it's really easy to click the wrong thing and you get the wrong angle, which is fine. I didn't actually create a key, so I can undo what I just did. Go forward. I want to click like right there. There we go. And maybe look up here and create a camera key. I won't bore you guys with this entire animation. We'll just get through real quick. So we'll do that and then maybe walk forward. So again, I'll use the airplane tool to, I don't know, go up the ladder. Something like that. And create the last camera key. I lied. I'm going to double it up. Okay, so I'm going to now go back, play. We can see what we just made. So we're going to walk in, look at the car, look back at the stairs, go up the stairs, something like that. Okay, so we've got our fly through animation. Now I want to switch to my procedural animation, but I'm going to stay in the same timeline here. So real easy to do. All you need to do is you grab your view that you want and drag that in something like that. So now from that section in time to this section in time, I've went from here, it's going to zoom in, and it's going to go boom like that. You know what actually I should have done, because you can see like everything is ghosted out at this point. I actually messed up. Let me delete that, what I just did. So I'm going to delete the time selection. And before I bring everything in, I just want to select everything in the tree, and I'm going to lock it down. So I just select everything in the assembly tab. I locked it down to create those camera keys for that, because I made a pretty drastic change from showing everything to just showing the car. So I'll bring that in like that. All right, now you'll see that everything stays the way it should be. And then as I kind of zoom to the car, everything goes out and we get the car there. Now the same thing applies when dragging your views into the timeline, just like the camera views when we're dealing with the timeline directly, is you want to double everything up. So I drag that guy in, we drag it in again, half a second apart from each other, full second apart, however you want that to look. You can always adjust those keys later. Now we don't have time to cover this completely, so what I'm going to do is just I'll skip a few steps, but just to show the animation. So really you take these guys, drag them in, two at a time, and we'll jump to, let's bring that guy in here, and then we'll bring this guy in, and then we'll jump to maybe this step. I'm skipping some steps here just to show the animation a little bit faster. But as you can see, we'll just take our steps that we made, bring them in. Let's jump down to, let's bring that in so we can actually complete that car frame. And then we get the mattress assembly. And let's bring in the ones that we made here, which is here. So what I'll typically do when I double them up, I'll double them up half a second away from each other, and then the next view I bring in, I'll bring about a second in from that, or away from that. So double up half second, about a second in, double up again. Okay. Also, if you notice, I have annotations. I got arrows, I got balloons. So that kind of stuff, if you want to show that stuff, you need to turn it on. So by default, when you drag and drop views into the timeline, anything 2D will be toggled off, and you're like, well, where did my stuff go? Just go to collaboration, make sure it's turned on so you can actually see it in the animation. And let's go ahead and see what we just made. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be darn close. I skipped a lot of steps, so there's going to be a little bit of jumping around, but you can kind of get the gist of it, of this animation video that we just made based off of those steps. So it makes animation super easy. You don't even have to know how to animate in Composer in order to create an animation, because you just create those steps in the views, drag them in, and you're done. You got that procedural animation. You go ahead and export that as a video. Or my favorite way to do it is to use the high resolution image output. Go to the multiple, you can do animation, you can say like 30 frames a second, dump those into a folder, use a video compiling software like Premiere or even Windows Movie Maker to stick those images together to get a nice video. So, little trick there. Okay, so that is the animation in Composer and the ease of use to export that. Also, keep in mind too, you can use the Composer player to view that animation I just made interactively. So you can use the player to play it on any PC, Windows-based PC, and you can rotate it while it's animating, which is really nice. Okay, so let's move on to Visualize. So going into Visualize, I have you know what? Let's show some examples first. So we got Visualize, and let's pop in some of these rendering examples. So here's just an image of the car. You can see it looks really nice, and I can make this look a lot better with some background, and you maybe keep it in the room and spice it up a bit with some extra lighting, and and make it look real photo quality. But this doesn't look too bad as a quick rendering. Here is the room. So again, as a basically out-of-the-box settings, dragging and dropping the appearances, it turns out pretty darn quick. And this is like a 3-minute rendering, so it's not even even to make something like this is not a big amount of time. When the time comes in for rendering is when you actually have to make an animation. So you think about it, and you're like, okay, well, it's 30 frames a second. This thing's going to be, 5 minutes long. That's a lot of seconds, and that's a lot of frames. So if it takes you 2-3 minutes to render out a single image, you got to multiply that by 30 for every second of video that you have. So it can add up. So that's why, if you're going to be making something that's procedural and it doesn't have to be photorealistic, then Composer might be a better option, because you're going to output that in a couple minutes instead of a couple hours, sort of thing. All right, so there's that guy. Let's show the video. So this is just the race car spinning around. And actually, I just had a render finish. This whole time I've been talking, Visualize has actually been rendering. And it's right here, so it says it's finished. It just finished here. And it should be on my desktop, which is, I believe, here. So let's take a look at that. First time you looking at this animation, so hopefully it's good. Basically, I just wanted to show kind of a similar procedural process, but done in Visualize, just a quick one. So there we go. By the way, with Visualize, another benefit is the ability to connect to a server for your renderings and for your actually using the software and the UI. So Boost comes with Visualize Pro, it comes free with it. And if you have another machine that has a decent graphics card on it, you can put Boost on that, and you can steal the power of that machine while you're rendering. So you can do things like I just did. I gave a presentation while I actually made a rendering on this computer because I stole the power of the other computer in order to process this video without slowing down my current computer. So it's a pretty slick process. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that. And before I move on to visualize, there's another thing I would like to show. So there's what's called a 3D image, and then the VR, the Pano VR from Composer. So the first one here is a interactive rotatable model. And really what this is, it's a series of JPEGs, and they're knitted together, which makes it super convenient for any device, because any device can view JPEGs, right? So the problem in the past has been, well, I want to put a rotatable model on my website, so I'm taking this and I'm moving it around. So, you know, I want to put this model on my website where I can rotate it and anybody can view it without having to download anything special. The problem with that is, in the past, we've always been trying to use 3D models for that. With 3D models, you need a viewer to view it. But this is not a 3D model. It looks like one, but it's actually a series of JPEGs that have been knitted together. So you can view it at any device, you know, with your smartphone, and you can use your finger to move it around and take a look at the 3D model. So a real nice solution SOLIDWORKS has come up with to kind of get around that model limitations. Okay, so next one is the VR. Run the allow access there. And this is really slick. So this is an interactive, and you can use, you know, VR headsets, and there's actually outputs here that you can use to make it real 3D looking with the VR headset. But yeah, I can look around the stage, and of course, model doesn't exist over there. I have no background, so that's kind of a void. But you can take a look at the cars and up there, and I can view this image in 3D space. So it's pretty darn slick, and it's super fast too. I was really amazed at the speed that this VR actually renders out. It's only like, I want to say it's like 5 or 6 images knitted together to make this. So it is really lightweight for this output. Now that we've shown that, let's jump into visualize. And here is the race car. So let me go ahead and show animation in visualize. Okay, so here's my race car, here's my timeline. You see that the timeline is blank. If I go to my cameras, it does bring in the camera from SOLIDWORKS, and it'll bring that as the default camera. So if you do bring in a motion study, it will bring over the cameras as well, which is real nice. Here I have 2 default cameras. I'll create a second one just for the animation. So, because you got to think, when you're in the animation, you're actually going to be moving that camera around. So you might lose that angle. So what you do is you right-click your camera, you copy, right-click, paste, and duplicate that for the animation. Another thing you want to watch out for is pivot points. So if you are going to be moving something, especially if you're importing something like an STL, which is, I'm sorry, this one's a step file, you don't know how it was modeled, and you don't know the origin of each individual model. So if you click on the model, if you model it in SOLIDWORKS, you probably won't have to worry about this. But if I go through and I say, you know what is the pivot point, which is right here, and I click on a model, it'll show me, well, my pivot point's way out here. Looks like I'm missing the option for that pivot. But let's add it to the timeline, then maybe the option will pop up, because there's supposed to be a little option where you can actually adjust that pivot. So let's go ahead and add the camera to the timeline. So go to cameras, right click this guy. I'm going to add keyframe. That's going to automatically add that item right to the timeline here. And you got to keep in mind, we're modifying this camera, and it gives you a little red light letting you know that's the camera that we're modifying. So let's do something like this. We have, we're going to zoom out a little bit, kind of get a nice, you know, isometric shot of that car. And then I want to hit this little key to update the camera for that. Now this red tab here, I move that to control the seconds of the timeline, how long the video is. And this one here controls what the current position of time I have. So if I go forward about a second, and let's say I rotate the camera, You see how it creates that camera key right there? Well, that's because I have auto keyframing turned on. So that can be a blessing or a curse, however you look at it, where if you wanted to auto keyframe, you want to turn it on. If you don't, you want to turn it off. So in the case of camera rotations, I like to have it off because every time I rotate the camera, I don't want it to move. So you just click on that to toggle it off. In this case, I'm going to delete that key just by hitting delete my keyboard and hitting the keyframe right there to manually control that key. Now I go forward in time, and let's zoom into like this tire here. So something like that. And you'll see I have keyframing turned on, so it's automatically going to keep my camera there. Now watch this. When I rotate back, or when I go back in time, and you'll see how the camera behaves, where it's trying to go from this point to that point. It's using this point as a reference, so it has a little wobble to the camera, which I probably don't want. In order to get rid of that, you just double up the keyframe. So you can go ahead and you can duplicate that. It's one way to do it, and that's the way I prefer to do it, to hold that camera still before it zooms into that location. And I'll just kind of duplicate that right there so it stays at that point. Now I want to add this rim and this tire to the timeline so that I can rotate it, or I can create like a procedural animation here, like bring it out or something like that. I'll explode it out, which I'll do. So if you make sure that you have the, not the model, we have the part selected here. So I'm going to select that part, I'm going to right click it, I'm going to add that to the timeline. Actually, let me see if I can pivot center. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so that's what was missing before. So before I add it to the timeline now, I think before I had my appearances. That's what happened. I had appearances selected, so I was selecting the color of the rim, not the actual rim. So just make sure because the select tool is very critical, what you have selected. As you can see with that little mistake I had there. So if I had part selected, now I'm selecting the part. Now I'm going to transform, and I say my pivot center is on the center of that part. Now I can make sure that the pivot is actually at the center of that rim, so if I want to rotate the rim, it's not rotating from some weird angle over here. All right, so let's also do that with the tire to make sure that it is on the center of the part right there. Now let's add both these to the timeline. So right click, animation, add keyframe right there. Right click, animation, add keyframe. It's real nice and visualize that you add each one independently. So that way, if you start moving parts around in screen, it's not like it's going to animate those. So let's say that there was like a decal or another wheel or something that imported off the model a little bit. You can move that without it adjusting in the timeline. So you control that independently. Now, I probably want these to be controlled from the beginning of the timeline. So I'm going to go ahead and move them here. I'm going to take them. Let's go ahead and duplicate them. I'm going to duplicate them one more time, because I want them to stay where they're at until this point here, something like that. Okay, so now we got our camera that zooms in, tires are locked down, their tire is locked down. I'm going to duplicate that so it stays where it's at. As you can see, there's a lot more steps here when you're actually working in the animation timeline opposed to the views. That's why you can do everything here. It just takes a little bit more work. I'm going to go through a little bit in time and then take these guys and translate them out. So let's move into our move tool. I'll grab that guy, move it out, take this guy, move it out, something like that. And now if you zoom back, you can see how the camera comes in, these guys explode out. And now I want to take this camera, go to the other set of tires, just like we had in that animation, and show how those come out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let's create a camera keyframe. So there's my camera there. We're going to lock it down, duplicate that because I'm about to move, and then go to maybe 7.5 seconds. Let's check out this side and do the same thing. And this will just be a quick animation just for example purposes here. So we got our camera movement. Now I want to add these two guys to the timeline, but before I do that, let me go ahead and make sure that the pivots are on the center of these as well. and then add it to the timeline, and add it to the timeline. And this one, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it where it added it, because I'm not going to modify them before that anyway, so they're fine. Duplicate them, go forward in time, and let's pull both these guys out with the move tool. So there's that, and there is that. And now when we watch this, you get this nice animation. Keep in mind it's low quality on screen right now, just because I'm in preview mode. But once you render it out, you get that nice high quality animation. And that is exactly how I made that animation that I displayed when I first jumped into Visualize, which is this guy right here. So that's that same guy there. So this is what it looks like once you actually render it out. Okay. Cool. So yeah, so again, all of these examples and everything are going to be on our website. And I'm sorry, they will be on our website at some point, but by the end of the week, they're going to be on YouTube. And so this video will link to all that other content, so you can jump in and see that live. Now, just a quick recap here. So Composer is really for that technical output, that kind of step-by-step procedural step that doesn't have to be photorealistic, and you're trying to get that out the door, within a timely manner. Visualize is for that photorealism. Takes a little bit more time to render out. If you do have a server or a second computer with a real nice graphics card on it, you can use the Visualize Pro Boost and what's called Power Boost to take the power of that machine to greatly increase your rendering times. Boost is the network renderer, so when you're all done with your setup, you send that to the server, and that renders it out for your final product. Power Boost enables you to use it real time, which I was trying to show live here, but I didn't have the server configured correctly because I was doing that rendering, and it would have taken just 2 minutes to fix, but it just I didn't realize that wasn't connected, so that's why I couldn't show it. But that basically just makes it a little bit faster. So same thing, just you could actually view it in real time. Yeah, cool. And then so of course Visualize is more for the photorealistic and the animations and the stuff that you really want to do for like marketing and trade shows and do that real wow factor. All right, we have 2 other webinars coming up very shortly. So April 4th and April 18th. First one is just to be more productive in SOLIDWORKS, so tips and tricks in SOLIDWORKS CAD. And then the second one is actually a little learning session for PDM. That's the design branching and merging. So if you're curious about any of that stuff, those events are coming up. And of course, you can register from our Webinar Wednesday section of the website. And then also all of these videos that we record get put on the website. And that is viewed right there under hawkersys.com/videos, so you can view that. Cool, so thank you for attending. Hope everybody got something out of this and some more information on both Visualize and Composer. And so I'm going to go ahead and open this up for questions. So the questions pane, I see we have a question in there already. I'll answer in 1 second here. But any questions you have, so for the next 5 minutes, I'll leave this open. Type it, I'll answer it live, and everybody have a great day.